Hi there, everybody. It is Friday, right around noon Pacific Standard Time, and it is time for our book discussion. So this week we're going to be looking at Crucial Conversations. It's a book on communication, and quite frankly, after reading it for the first time, I can't believe I haven't read it before. It is just one of the best ones that I've read in a long time. I can't recommend this book enough, and I'm kicking myself for kind of misreading what this book was about ages ago and not looking at it myself. I look to do these book discussions, and it's a great sort of free-form discussion. If you have questions, you can by all means drop down into the comment section. I'll just hit highlights of the book that I underlined and that were kind of takeaways that can be applied to frontline leaders like yourselves in the real world, and do some summarizing of it as well. So if you haven't read the book, this is absolutely something that will go right along with it. So go ahead. You can tune into this and get some good nuggets of wisdom from it, but I do recommend picking up this book. There are a ton of, they call them case studies. There's also just scenarios to play out that you will absolutely resonate with, that you will absolutely, you will definitely apply to your regular leadership and how you apply these principles. So it's a fantastic book, lots of highlights to get to in this, so I'm just going to kind of dive right into it. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, confessions, go ahead, drop them down in the comment section, but we'll just kind of get going today. The first thing to note is what is defined as a crucial conversation. A crucial conversation is a discussion between two or more people where 1, stakes are high, 2, opinions vary, and 3, emotions run strong. Now, I should say, actually, almost before we get to that the purpose of this book, what their research was looking for, is it was looking for the traits, the things in high performers that got results. What was it about high performers that got them results? And so they didn't set out to write a book necessarily about communication techniques, but what they found when they were looking for what it was that drove results in high performers, they found that communication techniques and handling these crucial conversations was absolutely essential, and I think they'll get to a little nugget on that here in a second. Vicki, so good to see you here. I'm glad you tuned in today. Despite the importance of crucial conversations, and we all recognize that, the importance of those really tough conversations, the tough meetings, the tough decisions that have to be made, despite that, we often back away from them because we fear that we'll make matters worse. We've become masters at avoiding tough conversations, and they'll go into some of the ways that that we typically do that. Clarissa, Cindy, so good to see you here. But that's probably the first thing to note, is that so many times when we face a tough decision, a tough conversation, when you're in a meeting and you need to raise your hand and make a comment about something, we're often fearful of doing that. And so we get really good at avoiding that. And if you avoid something, you're not getting the practice to get better at it. And so we'll talk about some strategies here just a little bit. There was one thing right off the bat that they get to that I never really considered in myself, but that is when you start getting emotional about something, when something hits you the wrong way, what happens is your body has a physiological reaction to that. So you're uncomfortable. Somebody is coming at you and accusing you of something. Immediately you have an emotional response. Adrenaline starts pumping into your bloodstream. You start forcing oxygen to the large muscles of your arms and legs. They get more blood, but they note in here the higher level reasoning section of your brain during those times get less. So one of the reasons that we are bad at those crucial conversations, I'll keep saying that and using that term over and over again in this session, but one of the reasons that we're so bad at it is we actually start not with a head start, but we start with being behind the game because our physiology doesn't help us think through things. We get emotional. That has a physical response. And what that physical response makes us get more emotional. Edna, so good to see you here. Always good to have you on board. So one of the main things to recognize, and it's not that you can necessarily do something with that. When you have a difficult conversation that you've got to have with somebody, your emotions are going to be high. You're going to have that physical response of adrenaline, of blood pumping to your muscles, not necessarily sticking in your brain. But at least acknowledging that that's taking place is the first step in being able to address it. Yes, we will be thinking our way through those conversations, but acknowledging that and not really kind of hamstringing yourself to carry on with that emotional response just because you started with it, realize that that is a physical reaction that you can actually get over. Getting into it here just a little bit, So the reason this book came about, and I kind of alluded to it a little bit before, 20 years of research involving more than 100,000 people reveals that the key skill for effective leaders, teammates, parents, and loved ones is the capacity to skillfully address emotionally and politically risky issues. So I tell you, if you've tuned into these before, I tell you that the default reaction when you have a problem, when you have an issue, when you have a crisis, the default reaction should be to communicate more. Communication is almost always a part of the solution to any particular problem that you are having. And this kind of goes along with this, and I'm going to say it one more time because it's vitally important. We try to improve our careers and improve our relationships by getting skills, especially in the workplace. We're looking to learn Excel, we're looking to learn PowerPoint, we're looking to be able to run meetings more effectively. But really, what it comes down to, and Kismela, so good to see you here, is that 20 years of research involving more than 100,000 people reveals that the key skill for effective leaders, teammates, parents, and loved ones is the capacity to skillfully address emotionally and politically risky issues. Those are the things that matter. Those things where the tensions are high, you're in crisis mode. Your ability to communicate through those particular scenarios, through those particular issues, is going to have a huge effect on your overall productivity and the trajectory of your relationships and your career. Ubaida, so good to see you here. Glad you tuned in. So I just kind of wanted to hit that really hard because we try to get around that. And it's just being completely honest. Having been in the workforce, you try to get around those difficult conversations. You try to get around those issues. And so if you can find an alternative course of action, then you look to take that. You take that alternative course of action of building up your skill sets, when truthfully the skill set that you really need to learn is the ability to face and deal with those big topics, those uncomfortable topics, because those are the ones that usually move the needle. Christelle, thanks for chiming in there. The mistake that most of us make in our crucial conversations is we believe that we have to choose between telling the truth and keeping a friend. So we feel like the truth and the relationship are on opposite ends of the spectrum, and that you cannot address both of those. And the question goes, how can I be 100% honest and at the same time be 100% respectful? That's absolutely it. And we'll talk through some of those techniques, but kind of setting the stage for some of those problems and some of those issues that we address. The reason you avoid so many of those hard topics is because it's bad news for somebody and you feel like that's going to affect the relationship. You want to get the results, but you don't want to harm the relationship. So many of us, we do nothing. We stay silent in those situations. At the core of every successful conversation lies the free flow of relevant ideas. So again, kind of setting the stage here. What they talk about a lot in this book, and I don't think I underlined any particular section on it, is they talk about the pool of meaning. So every dialogue and every conversation that you have has a pool of meaning. And that is all of the opinions, all of the facts, all of the information that you can gather. And so the idea behind a crucial conversation is to get as much into that pool of meaning as possible, and then from all of that information, make your decisions and come up with your courses of action moving forward. But investing in that pool of meaning is hugely important. So it's all about the dialogue. Conversely, when people aren't involved, when they sit back quietly during touchy conversations, we have all done this in meetings, they're rarely committed to the final decision. This goes perfectly with last week's discussion, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's actually a quote that I used in a conference speaking engagement I had here in Vegas on Monday, and that is, those people that are not involved in the conversation will have no commitment. All right, without involvement, there can be no commitment. And that's a huge issue. And so when you come in and give directives and don't have dialogue with people, you're not going to get the commitment, and it hurts you in the end. The time you spend up front establishing a shared pool of meaning more than pays for itself by faster, more unified, and more committed actions later on. The investment of time, people say that they don't have time to listen to their teammates, or to their team, to their employees. It can't be all about consensus. And no, it can't be all about consensus. But spending some time listening and gathering information can prevent you from making a mistake. So The answer is, do you have time to prevent mistakes? How much does it cost you when you don't listen? And you have that situation where you're a week later and somebody says, well, I knew that was going to happen if you did that. Well, why didn't you say something? Well, because you weren't listening, that sort of thing. Vicki has a kind of comment here, and I just want to be able to kind of call it out for you, Vicki, because I'm sure it's something everybody deals with. I find myself shutting down and taking things too personally instead of communicating more, something I really need to work on. And Vicki, absolutely, and this book definitely addresses it. I definitely recommend Crucial Conversations. Pick it up. There's going to be, you'll at least move in with a plan, and with that plan is a little bit more confidence to be able to not shut down in those particular situations. But it talks about different ways of navigating that so you don't shut down necessarily. You extend the olive branch to somebody and try to find that middle ground to work with, all right? So tune in. You'll pick up a few things from here, hopefully, Vicki. Whatever the decision-making method, the greater the shared meaning in the pool, the better the choice, the more the unity and the stronger the conviction. Whoever makes the choice, the more information you get into that. Having the conversation with somebody, having the dialogue, bringing in as much into that pool of meaning as possible gives you the best information to make the decisions that are best for the organization, for you personally, for the relationship, whatever it is that you're dealing with. Every time we find ourselves arguing, debating, running away, or otherwise acting in an ineffective way, it's because we don't know how to share meaning. Sometimes we move to silence. Sometimes we rely on hints, sarcasm, caustic humor, innuendo, and looks of disgust to make our points. On other occasions, we try to force our meaning into the pool. We rely on violence, forcing the conversation in a certain way. So getting back to you, Vicki, it may be that you don't know how, when you are presented with, shall we say, aggressive discussions, you don't know how to get that back into a position where you can share the meaning. And I know that gets addressed later on in the book. Moving along here, and we start at the beginning. So we start diving into their philosophy on how you actually start having these conversations. Mazam, so it's good to see you here. As with so many things, it starts with you, not with the other person. It starts with you. And the chapter is labeled Start with Heart. And it's, if you can't get yourself right, you'll have a hard time getting dialogue right. And I want to hit on that. When there's an old saying that the only consistent factor in all of your failed relationships is you. I love that quote in regards to relationships. But the common denominator in all of your bad conversations is you as well. So the first thing to do is make sure that you have got yourself set up right. Our problem is not that our behavior degenerates, it's that in these conversations our motivations do. So I'll keep hitting on your example, Vicki, but you might shut down. Brian, good to see you here. You might shut down because that's a defensive mechanism at that point. All right? Your motivation has changed. Instead of wanting to give your opinion and contribute to the pool of meaning, to keep using the terminology in the book, you instead shut down. Your motivation is to not get hurt, so you get defensive and you get silent, and that's very, very common. There's a lot of reason that people don't raise their hand in meetings and give the hard advice that everybody in the room is thinking about, is because it's a defensive move, because they're afraid that the CEO, the vice president, whoever's at the head of the table, is going to smack them down for having the audacity to call out the truth that everybody knows. So the first step in achieving the results we really want, the results you really want in a conversation, is to fix the problem of believing that others are the source of all that ails us. Don't get me wrong. Other people certainly have a say in how these things play out. And it's not all on you. The responsibility isn't 100% on you. But again, tying back to Stephen Covey, who wrote the foreword for this, if I'm not mistaken, a new foreword for this book. So hence why it kind of contributes to that, I think, just a little bit, is that you do have that little bit of space between what happens to you and what your reaction is. And so getting in touch with that space, your reaction to it, is something that's going to help move things forward. We'll talk into some of the specifics as we continue to go forward. It is, did you begin? Okay, yeah. So they begin the conversation, all right, starting with yourself, making sure you're in the right place. You begin any high-risk discussion with the right motives, all right, making sure your motives are in place, and you stay focused on that motive no matter what happens. So you have the motivation of wanting to contribute to a great decision for the organization, but everybody seems to be attacking you, so your motive changes. You need to be able to stick with that motive. Don't change your motive, stick with it, and that's going to carry you through. And what I'll say with so many of these things, and I realize that these are hard to put in place. I've tried to put these things in place back in my own career, so I know the difficulty with it. The thing is just to try it once. Do it once and then do it once more. You gain a skill set in communication is absolutely a skill, and they'll talk through some specific planning on how to do this in here. But you have to be able to persevere through those times where you're struggling. All right? None of us learned to walk like that. We all fell down a whole bunch of times. And that's the same sort of analogy you can use with just about any skill. Even if you have a natural talent for something, you still need to learn and improve to truly master it. When faced with pressure and strong opinions, we often stop worrying about the goal of adding to the pool of meeting and start looking for ways to win, to punish, or to keep the peace. So in these crucial conversations, in these high-value conversations, there is a lot of pressure. And when that happens, it's easy for that adrenaline, for the emotions to get into it, and for you to quickly change your motivations, because that physiology also has a psychological response as well. When you are attacked, you want to fight or flight. Those are those natural reactions that you have, and you have to fight through those. And the way to do that is to get crystal clear on what your motivation is when you step into a particular conversation. Hey, some of these conversations may blindside you, come out of nowhere, but most of them you are at least somewhat aware of and you can prepare for ahead of time. And I think that's one of the big things. So focus on your motivations. What is it that you want out of a conversation? And so again, this is all you. You're starting with heart is the name of this chapter. Good, glad to see that, Cindy. Second thing is to focus on what you really want. What is the goal of this particular conversation? What is the decision that you're looking to get out of it? What is the resolution that you're looking to drive out of this conversation? So get clear on your motivation and then get crystal clear on what your goal is for this particular conversation. When you need to have those tough conversations, it's really important that you know in your mind what it is that you're after. If you can set that goal, it's easier, to keep on pace towards it, but to make the decisions that need to take place to get you to that particular goal. Third thing to focus on is they call this section of the chapter, learn to spot crucial conversations, all right? First, stay alert for the moment a conversation turns from a routine or harmless discussion into a crucial one. And what they mean by that is that the emotionality gets charged up a little bit. It becomes a little bit more of an important discussion, those things. Some people first notice physical signals. Their stomach might turn. They might notice the way that people are reacting to a rolling of eyes. Their face might start turning red as they get pissed off. Others notice the emotions, all right? They might feel their own emotions turn from calm, just having a conversation, to something that, Sharon, good to see you here. Nicole, I'll get to your comment here in just a second. Some people might feel their own blood rising, and all of a sudden they get more agitated. They start talking quicker. Learn to spot these things. That's one of the first things, is to take charge of yourself beforehand, but once you start having the conversation, take charge of that. And then some people's first cue is behavioral. All right, they might start pointing fingers. They might start getting more animated. They might start talking louder, talking faster, I kind of mentioned before. You want to be on the lookout for those cues in yourself and in others. And that's the third thing. So get your motivation right, get your goal right, look for the cues for when things turn crucial, when things start getting heated, all right? Alice has a comment, how to deal with a manager who doesn't deserve to be this one. She doesn't observe, communicate, help, support, motivate. I'll get to that. I'll see if I can get to that here in a second, see if something pops up, Nahal. But that may be something I take offline to either I'll probably start a mentor minute session with it because that's a good topic for it. But I may just address that one privately in the comments after the session's over. The fourth thing is to learn to look for safety problems. All right, specifically, you're looking for your own reactions, the reaction of others, turning things, when things turn crucial. The other thing you want to look for is when people's safety gets affected in this. So when it's safe, you can say anything. The problem is not that the content of your message oftentimes, but the condition of the conversation. So it may be that the other person is particularly stressed out. They're not meeting their quotas. They're really concerned about their jobs. And so having any discussion in regards to job performance now becomes crucial, no matter how minor it is, because of the conditions surrounding that. So what you want to do is you want to have an environment where it's safe for people to give their opinions. Now, in a leadership role, and they don't address this here, but in a leadership role, I want to say it's almost easy, in that you have a little bit more control over the conversation. So you can welcome aggressive opinions. Thank you. I appreciate you coming at me with that hard information. Now, here's some of the things that I might say on this and where you and I might differ. But you can take some more control of that. But look for those safety things. Vicky, at the beginning, one of the reasons you might shut down is because you feel safety. Somebody is now attacking you. And so they're attacking your public perception, your public place in the workplace. And that can be something that charges up a conversation a little bit more and causes people to shut down. I'll skip that part there. Now, where this comes in, where so much of, and this may be where you actually notice that you are having an issue with crucial conversations. This is watching yourself to see when things magnify. Where this really comes in is silence and violence, is how they call it out in here. As people begin to feel unsafe, they start down one of two unhealthy paths. They either move to silence or to violence. In the case of silence, a lot of times it's masking. So masking consists of understanding or selectively showing our true opinions. Sarcasm, sugarcoating, and couching are some of the more popular forms of masking that we might do. So when you catch yourself being a little bit more sarcastic, realize that you've stepped into the crucial conversation aspect of things and you're starting down the wrong path. All right? Avoiding is another way of silence. All right? Steering completely away from sensitive subjects. We talk, but without addressing the real issues. How many meetings have we been in where we talked about that? Where you talked around for an hour, but you never talked about the real main issue. That's a method of silence. And a lot of times that's a defensive mechanism where people don't want to stick their head out because they're afraid it's going to get chopped off. Third aspect of silence is withdrawing. It means pulling out of a conversation altogether. We either exit the conversation or exit the room. You shut down. That's, you're being quiet. You're not going to give your opinion anymore because you know what? Nobody wants to take it anyways. That's another way of phrasing that. Moving into violence. So, again, as people begin to feel unsafe, they start down one of these two paths, silence or violence. Violence, you'd be controlling, consists of coercing others to your way of thinking. It's done through either forcing your views on others, using your authoritarian position, if you have one, or dominating the conversation. A lot of times, people will just simply interrupt. You're controlling the conversation when you're interrupting constantly, all right? The other thing is labeling, is putting a label on people or ideas so we can dismiss them under general stereotypes or categories. So using terms like, these ideas are practically Neanderthal, for crying out first. And so you kind of skimming through some of these things. So controlling, labeling, and then attacking specifically. So you're attacking the person, their sensibilities, their ideas, their behaviors. You're attacking somebody. Those are the methods of violence. The thing to do is, and call it out, is look for what you are apt to do under stress. What are the methods of silence and violence that you might exercise in your communication when you go down that road of not feeling safe in a particular environment? I'll tell you right now, mine was withdrawing. I would withdraw from a conversation if I needed to be silent. If I needed to be more violent, let's say that was my tendency, not I needed to, but I was, then I would be more controlling. So I would interrupt. I'd talk a little bit louder. I'd talk a little bit longer. Quite frankly, I'd extend out my sentences. So those were the two things. When I was under stress, when I was feeling attacked in a crucial conversation, I would withdraw if I was going to be silent, or I would start controlling the conversation. Take a second to think about how you react, in poor conversations. And these are just some of those basic things that absolutely will have a benefit for you. They actually have in this book a stress test. So a whole bunch of questions that you can take, simple true false questions that identify a whole bunch of areas and where in this book you can get the most value. Again, this is fantastic. I mean, this is an absolutely wonderful book. Really enjoyed it. So they have a little test in there so you can kind of bring a little bit more focus to what it is that you're getting out of this book. But kind of summarizing this first chapter, and that is starting with yourself, is learn to look at content and conditions. What are the conditions surrounding everything, and what is the content of what you're saying? Look for when things become crucial. Look for those clues on when things have escalated from a regular conversation into something that's going to be a little bit more. Learn to watch for safety problems, both in yourself and in others. 4, look to see if others are moving towards silence or violence. And 5, look for outbreaks of your style under stress. So being aware. So we start, this conversation, starting the conversation, you want to get clear on what your motivation is and what your goals are. And then it's all about looking around and seeing where things are. Because when you look and you see and you acknowledge, then you can take steps. Too many times in these conversations, what happens is we get charged up and we just keep going. And we're not paying any attention to what anybody is saying, what anybody else is doing, because we're so focused on getting our point across. But without taking in that new information that's out there, we can't make the adjustments that are going to get that method across. All right, you've got it. Those conversations are always fluid, so you need to be able to navigate those well and make adjustments as you go for what is happening in the room. So after you start with yourself, the next step, next chapter in the book is making it safe. Not surprising. You need to have a safe environment where everybody feels comfortable sharing their ideas. Now, realizing very few of us work in organizations where it is comfortable for everybody to share their ideas, no matter how wacky and crazy they might be. The first step in establishing safety within an organization, within a conversation, within a meeting, is to establish a mutual purpose. All right? Mutual purpose means that others perceive that you're working towards a common outcome in the conversation, that you care about their goals, interests, and values. Mutual purpose is the entry condition to dialogue. All right? First, when mutual purpose is at risk, we end up in debate, not dialogue. So establishing right at the beginning that there is a mutual purpose, the purpose to this meeting, the purpose to this discussion. All right, well, I want to bring you into the office. I need to discuss something. I'm going to phrase this completely wrong, but in regards to performance, setting the mutual purpose. Hey, we all want, I guess I did this a lot when there was interpersonal conflict with employees, where I would tie it to a common goal. Hey, we all want to get a ton of work done, and we all want the workplace to be a great place where everybody's happy and everybody gets along. All right, so you establish those higher goals that everybody can tie to, and that common thread makes it easy to pass over some of the different ways of getting there, because we understand that in so many ways that there are multiple paths to getting to the particular goal. I use sports analogies all the time. The goal of most games is to score more points than your opponent. There's 2 ways to do that, offense and defense. You can score a ton of points, or you can prohibit the other team from scoring points. Those are different ways of tackling it. And depending on your opponent, depending on the week, depending on your roster, you might change what your plan is on a regular basis. But establish that purpose and get clear on that purpose, and that really helps set a good environment where it is safe to throw out different ideas, because we're all on the same team, all working towards different things. You have to be sure that the employees' goals and objectives are the same as you want to discuss. Great point, Brian. And they will change certainly for each individual, but each individual generally wants to be respected, wants a positive workplace, wants to be fulfilled, and wants to be recognized for the good things that they do, and wants to keep being challenged. There's a bunch of kind of common ones that you can kind of tie to and tie in so many of these topics into. So you do have to be creative for the individual and the conversation, but looking for those opportunities. Respect. So the second aspect is talking about mutual respect. All right, maintaining a level of respect throughout the conversation. And I really like this particular quote. Respect is like air. As long as it's present, nobody even thinks about it. But if you take it away, it's all that people can think about. All right, I'm going to say that again because it's beautiful. Respect is like air. As long as it's present, nobody thinks about it. But if you take it away, it is all that people can think about. All right, you want to watch for when people are defending their dignity. All right, that's where you get into that respect aspect of things, is when they start defending their dignity. They come up with excuses for particular behaviors, that sort of thing. That's where you might be going on down the respect road, and you need to be able to address that with people. One of the ways that you do that, one of the ways that you show respect, and so the answer is, okay, well, I have to, people make excuses when I call them out on particular behaviors, and that's me affecting their respect. Yes, that might be affecting the respect that they feel from you. But I like this next one, and it gets at how you get around that, okay? When we recognize that we all have weaknesses, it is easier to find a way to respect others. And that is reciprocated the same way. It is important that you acknowledge you have weaknesses. The best boss in the world, the best CEO of a Fortune 500 company has weaknesses. And so when you can acknowledge that we all have weaknesses, we just have to call them out and address them and find ways to work around them, then it becomes a much more, you diffuse that conversation a little bit. All right, you show respect because you're going to have respect for yourself, so you can call out your own mistakes. This is a mistake that I made. This is a weakness that I have, and this is how I'm addressing it. When you do that, you're showing respect for another individual, and how calling out those things isn't necessarily a disrespectful action. It can actually be a respectful action to call those things out. So just a great little tactic there is to recognize that everybody has weaknesses, and it's a great way of showing and achieving respect. One of the things that they mention here as far as making it safe is to be careful with apologies. Don't be afraid to apologize, but only do it when it's appropriate. All right. If you have a difficult conversation to have, don't start off with, I'm sorry to be able to have this conversation, but we need to talk about your performance in this regard. Well, no, you're not sorry you're having to have the conversation. You're not apologizing to the person. You're sorry for yourself that you have to have this difficult conversation with me. So apologize where it's appropriate. Another great point that they had here when they talked about making it safe is to step out of the content of the conversation. Content generally focuses on strategies. And what you want to do is you want to explore the purpose behind those strategies. And what it gets at is so many times we have the same goals. Yeah, I'll throw out the next couple of quotes and then kind of give my commentary on it. Sometimes when you recognize the purposes behind another person's strategies, you discover that you actually have compatible goals. Find an objective that is more meaningful or more rewarding than the ones that divide the various sides. So too many times what we're fighting about is the strategies of getting towards the same goal. But we want to acknowledge that we are actually going for that same purpose, that same goal. And what that does is that frees us up to perhaps come up with a synergistic strategy of getting there. Maybe something different. You can kind of brainstorm some of those things. But make sure that you are clear that when you are getting caught up, bogged down in a debate on something, step back from the content and take a look at what the purpose is. The purpose in those interpersonal conflicts, the purpose is that everybody wants a fun working environment where everybody gets along. Everybody wants that. The reality is that we aren't going to get it all the time, but we also have different ways of getting there. And so getting clear on what you agree with is a great way of adding safety to a conversation and making it clear that we're all looking for the same goal, we just have different ways of getting there. So it's just great, again, foundational thing to kind of get right with your conversations. As is the case with most complicated problems, don't aim for perfection, aim for progress. And this was a great call out for so many things. So I'm going to say it one more time. As is the case with most complicated problems, don't aim for perfection, aim for progress. If you're looking to have a perfect conversation with an individual, it's not going to happen. All right, but what you can do is you can continue to make progress within the conversation. You can make progress towards your goals. All right, so don't get dogmatic in being perfect, because what happens is when you want to have a perfect conversation or a perfect project, when something goes wrong, you realize you can't be perfect anymore, and your motivation goes by the wayside, and your purpose can actually slide off too, because you set your sights on something that was kind of unattainable. Be focused on making progress towards good conversations, and that's a great thing to think about as you work on your communication, as you work on getting better at these crucial conversations. You won't get perfect at it, but you will get better at it the more that you practice. All right, so focus on progress, not on perfection. All right, and that what'll happen is you'll get closer and closer to perfection as you get more and more progress. Getting control and just talking through reality on things as well, and that is you and only you create your emotions. You can act on them or be acted on by them. And the acknowledgement of the emotional control that you have. And I was trying to come up with a particular scenario where this comes up, but you can think about times where you had bad news, but you had bad news on a great day. All right, there was something that happened in the warehouse that was bad. However, you guys just set, great records for revenue. You had your most productive day ever, that sort of thing. How you react to that particular news is different on a great day as opposed to a day that is more mundane, where little things keep going wrong, and then all of a sudden you have a problem in the warehouse, same problem, and you blow up, and it becomes the biggest thing and the most self-defeating thing. So we have control over our emotions. They are malleable to the situation, to the conditions, to everything else. Now it gets back to conditions and thinking about that a little bit with people. But keep focused on your control and how you can control some of those things. And look back on those past situations where you had bad news on a great day and how you reacted to it. Any set of facts, like this part here. And so we're talking about mastering your story now. So we talk about starting to talk about how you are going to have a dialogue and how you're opening up the dialogue with somebody, all right? And getting clear on, first and foremost, the facts, all right? Any set of facts can be used to tell an infinite number of stories. Any number of facts can be used to tell an infinite number of stories. You see this right now here in the States, and I'm sure everywhere, you see this on media. All right, you might have the same facts, but if you tune into Fox News, you're going to get a different story than what you get on CNN. Likewise, we see the same things in ourselves. We will take a certain set of facts and use it for the purposes of pumping ourselves up or pushing down somebody else, all right? Facts are facts. They are what they are. However, you can interpret them in a number of different ways, and that's why they use the term story here. When you're talking your story, when you're having a dialogue with somebody and getting your point across to them, that the facts can tell a whole bunch of different stories, and then get into how you react to that as well. You can take the facts that are presented and you can spin them in a completely different way when somebody is telling you their story. If we take control of our stories, they won't control us. All right? So as you go down your path, first you have to stop what you're currently doing. Then you have to get in touch with why you're doing it. Here's how to retrace your path. So they start talking through this. So let's say you're having a conversation, and all of a sudden you recognize that emotions are rising and it's getting crucial. Or you're in a meeting and you've just said a couple of things and it hasn't gone over well, and you find yourself sitting back in your chair and you're like, I'm not going to talk anymore. Recognizing that. Now, what is it that you do? All right. First, you act. Notice your behavior. Ask yourself, am I in some form of silence or violence? Check on your feelings. Get in touch with your feelings. What emotions are encouraging me to act this way? So how am I at? Am I in some sort of silence or violence? What emotions are encouraging me to act this way? Analyze your stories. What story is creating these emotions? The reason that the boss keeps shooting my ideas down is because he or she thinks I'm completely incompetent. That might be the story. The facts are that he or she has shot down your last two ideas. Those are the facts. But is the story that you're telling yourself different or wrong? And I completely jumped ahead of the last point, and that is, what evidence do I have to support this story? So the evidence that you would have in my prior example, they have shot it down twice. All right. Does that mean that they think I'm incompetent? Well, what other facts would lend itself to incompetence? Well, they just told me I was doing a great job in last week's one-on-one. In the prior meeting, they were running with all of my ideas, so no, they don't think I'm incompetent. They're just shooting down two particular facts. So you retrace that path. Notice your behavior, get in touch with your feelings, analyze your story, and get back to the facts. Because you can interpret facts all kinds of different ways, as you just kind of saw laid out. And that's what is really powerful. And yeah, Vicki, you're dead right. It's perception, not reality. What is so powerful in this book is how many stories and case studies they go through. I'm glossing over pretty much all of them in this particular case, but there are a ton of parts that really drive it home and show you how you can apply it. And you'll recognize these situations. So many of these situations are very, very common in your personal life or your professional life. Spot the story by watching for hot words. So looking at your story, again, still talking about giving what you see, your interpretation of the facts. Be mindful of what they call hot words. When you start using terms like stupid, ridiculous, she was scowling at me. Well, no, she was frowning, not scowling. You're using more animated words, and that can be indicative of a story that's kind of going wrong just a little bit. Because we can tell stories that are not accurate by any stretch of the imagination. And they talk about they call them three clever stories that we tell ourselves. All right. Either our stories are completely accurate and propel us in healthy directions. So if you've got the facts laid out right and your story is correct, then it helps you move towards resolution. Or they're quite inaccurate, but justify our current behavior. And that's where so many of these three clever stories come into play that we often tell ourselves, and that you will very much recognize, is that it isn't necessarily set towards that goal. Again, the importance of being clear on motivation and goal. It's justifying behavior then at that point. First one, very familiar, is the victim story. It's not my fault. All right. Within most crucial conversations, when you tell a victim story, you intentionally ignore the role you have played in the problem. I tell leaders this all the time in regards to employees and employee failures. The reason you can take ownership of any of those problems is because you can take ownership of any of those problems. When something goes wrong, you can always point to things that you could have done that would have fixed the problem, that would have gotten ahead of it, that would have prevented it from occurring. Now, it's not realistic to go down all of those routes, but those are the things that you want to learn from and look for. But so many times we excuse it as a horrible employee, a horrible situation, whatever else. It's not my fault, is what you're telling yourself. But you're ignoring the things that you could have done that could have potentially prevented that. To help support your victim stories, you speak of nothing but your noble motives. This starts getting deep with this one. All right. I took longer because I was trying to beat the standard specs. So you talk in noble terms. Well, no, I wasn't focused on the details. I'm focused on the larger vision and empowering my employees to do these things. The fact that the employee completely failed to do it isn't my fault. That's their fault. I was doing the right thing, the noble thing of empowering them. So then you tell yourself that you're being punished for your virtues, not your vices. He just doesn't appreciate a person with my superb attention to detail. So it rings so true, and I'm guilty of it. I'm sure everybody else is guilty of it out there too. You ignore your role when you're telling victim stories. You ignore your role and what you could have done in the situation. You set yourself up with noble standards for it. You pump yourself up, and then you find a way to make the other person the villain, which gets into villain stories. All right, and that is, it's all your fault. All right, in victim stories, we exaggerate our own innocence. In villain stories, we overemphasize the other person's guilt or stupidity. All right, it's important. We are talking about mastering your story. So you're taking the facts that you have. You're laying out what your opinion is, or what your conclusions are based on those facts in a particular crucial conversation. And what happens is we go down these three very negative routes sometimes of it's not my fault or it's all your fault. Not only do villain stories help us blame others for bad results, but they also set us up to then do whatever we want to the villains. then we can go ahead and behave exactly however we want. Again, you're justifying behavior. You've taken your mind off of the goal and you are focused on justifying what you're currently doing in these situations. The third one is helpless stories. There's nothing else I could do. All right? In these fabrications, we make ourselves out to be powerless to do anything healthy or helpful. And it's just those three things that you want to be aware of when you're having a crucial conversation, an important discussion, important meeting, that sort of thing. Be mindful of when you step into these three particular areas, because when you start telling a victim, villain, or helpless story, you are generally justifying your behavior, not necessarily working towards a goal that you have all set for yourselves. They also talk about how your stories can also generate from small things that you didn't do. I want to say a guilty conscience. They call it the sellout. All right, and they give some examples to kind of reiterate how some of the bad effects, those villain stories, victim stories, yeah, very much so, Liz. Those villain stories, victim stories, and helpless stories often come out of a seed, a very small seed that is left to grow and grow and grow, and then finally sprouts up off the ground. And the sellouts are not often big events. In fact, they can be very small. Some common ones: you believe that you should help someone, but you don't. You believe you should apologize, but you don't. You believe you should stay late to finish up on a commitment, but go home instead. All these little things, and they go through another 5, 6, 7 of them. When we don't admit our own mistakes, we obsess about others' faults, our innocence, and our powerlessness to do anything. Very deep sort of conversation, deep-seated, I want to say almost resentment for self. Those are those things that you could have done, that you didn't do. And because you didn't do, it's like you almost protect that behavior that you had. And that creates a whole bunch of bad things that come up. So get clear on your goals, get clear on your motives, and when you start telling your story, focus on the facts. When you see that your story is starting to go awry, then what you want to do is you want to double back to it, and you want to tell the rest of the story. What transforms a clever story into a useful one of those victim, villain, and helpless ones, is the rest of the story. Talking about how you could have helped prevent that. Your role in whatever it is that you're talking about, that you're not helpless, that you do have something to do. That's because clever stories have one characteristic in common. They're incomplete. They don't have all of the facts presented. And so if you want to turn that bad story that you're talking about, then all you need to do is include the rest of the facts, the rest of the story. It's done by turning victims into actors. All right? So you're not a victim, you are an actor in the play. You are an actor in what happened. All right? You turn villains into humans. All right? This person, my nemesis in the organization and another isn't my nemesis. They are human. They have wants, they have needs, they have inconsistencies in thought, just like everybody else has. We all have weaknesses, to tie back to things. And you turn the helpless into the able. All right, I may have been helpless, but I can do something now, is a nice way of spinning that around. Kind of summarizing this, summarizing so much of it. So retrace your path. All right, so if strong emotions are keeping you stuck in silence or violence, if you're having trouble telling your story, or you're telling one of the clever stories, as they say, when your discussion starts going awry, retrace your path. Am I in some form of silence or violence? Get in touch with those feelings of yours. Analyze your story. Question your conclusions. What emotions are encouraging you to act that way? What story is creating these emotions? Get back to the facts. That can be hugely helpful. And then what evidence do I have to support this story? Watch for those clever stories that are out there. Further things as far as telling the rest of the story. Am I pretending not to notice my role in the problem? This is where your story goes awry. Why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person be doing this when you're looking to blame somebody else? What is it that I really want? All right, and what would I do right now if I really wanted these results? So you get yourself focused back on action. in those things. So much of this is an awareness. And simply reading the book, listening to this video, kind of thinking about some of these things makes you aware of them, and it's easier to spot them and then easier to make adjustments as you go forward. So the next one is how to start speaking persuasively instead of abrasively. So one of the first things to do, not surprisingly, is maintaining safety. So if you want to be persuasive instead of abrasive, then you have to maintain the safety for everybody else. And this is said perfectly. Skilled people are confident that they have something to say, but they also realize that others have valuable input. You don't know the whole story. You have a perspective as a leader in your organization. You have a perspective. You have a vision. But you don't see everything that's happening on the ground level. That's another vision. So you don't have all of the information. You can have all of the reports that you want, but you don't have all of the information. People, other individuals have valuable perspectives and valuable informations that may not sway your decision at all, but they do add a little bit of color to it, and in some cases they can change what your decision was going to be. All right. Once you've worked on yourself to create the right conditions for dialogue, you can then draw up 5 distinct skills, all right? Working through some of these things, all right? We talked about kind of the emotional things to be aware of, to make sure you're setting the stage right, to make sure you're not making those things. But when we're starting to talk about kind of the nitty-gritty of getting your message across, share your facts, tell your story, ask for the other person's path, talk tentatively, and encourage testing. All right. So share your facts is somewhat self-explanatory, but facts provide a safe beginning. By their very nature, facts aren't controversial, and the facts are the most persuasive. So what happens too many times is we rush to judgment. One of the best things to do is actually, it may be that you simply say, last week this happened. And this happened, and they're facts. And so you haven't started with judgment yet at all on this. Facts are the least insulting, all right? They are what they are. You haven't, again, put judgment on there. Begin your path with facts. Earn the right to share your story by starting with your facts. Facts lay the groundwork for all delicate conversations. It shows that you've done the work. It shows that you've been paying attention, that you're not just coming with this off the cuff because of some personality conflict that you have with somebody. So earn the right to share your judgment, to share your opinion, to share your story, as they say, by laying out the facts first and foremost. Then you tell your story, all right? Now it takes confidence to throw it out there, and you don't want to pile on. And what you want to do when you're telling your story is you want to be mindful and look for safety problems. All right, when the person starts getting defensive, when the person shuts down, don't apologize for your views. But what you can do is use something called contrasting. And use an example of a babysitter here. Or actually, no, I think a school teacher. I know you care a great deal about my daughter, and I'm confident you're well trained. That's not my concern at all. I know you want to do what's best for Debbie, and I do too. My only issue is that this is an ambiguous decision with huge implications for the rest of her life. It's talking about holding a daughter back in school for 1 grade. And so what you do is when you run into those safety problems, they use, like I say, they use the term contrasted, where it's, I don't mean that you're incompetent. I do know that you have a bunch of skills that are useful to the organization, and I need your opinions to make these decisions, but I'm just concerned with this particular aspect. So it's almost like a re-clarifying as opposed to contrasting. But then you move into ask for the other person's path. What's their ideas? What's their story? All right, to find out others' views on a matter, encourage them to express their facts, stories, and feelings. Then carefully listen to what they have to say. Now, so you're laying out your facts, you're laying out your story, and then you're asking for what their story is. Very natural flow. That's how most conversations go. Now, a couple of details to get to make this a little bit better, talking about the how behind this. When sharing a story, strike a blend with between confidence and humility, all right? Because we're trying to add meaning to the pool, not force it down somebody's throat. A lot of times it's you want to be, they say, tentative and not wimpy. You want to um, you want to be mindful. They're coming up with really bad examples. You may not be intending this. I think the term you're looking for is to reframe. Thank you, Brian. Thank you. I've used these in some difficult conversations that are of a more personal nature when coaching a particular client or an employee back in the day. You may not be intending this, but this is what is out there. I know this might not be what your intention is with this, but you talk tentatively. You don't come down and say, you know what, I've got these facts, and this is the decision. You've got these facts, and you want to get their opinions on it. You want to get their story before you make a decision. That's why you use more tentative terms. All right. The last thing is that you want to encourage testing. All right. You want to invite opposing views. So if you think others may be hesitant, make it clear that you want to hear their views. Sometimes the way you do this is you play devil's advocate. Well, let me make the other argument. This is a great way to have discussions and debate, is to actually flip the roles and say, okay, well, Cameron, now I want you to defend this particular course of action. Why would this be the good course of action to go with? So you could play a little bit of devil's advocate. You encourage that testing of hypotheses. And do this until the motives become obvious. So you keep calling out, you keep asking for more opinions, you keep playing devil's advocate, you keep throwing out, you roll out a particular bit of bad news to the team in some sort of team meeting. And it's, hey, does anybody have any questions? Hey, I know this is catching everybody off guard. Let me know what you're thinking. And it might be that you go ahead and throw out there, is everybody kind of quiet because they feel like I'm just making this decision for money purposes without any care of the human element at all? So you actually throw out some of those things. And you do that until it's clear that your motives are in the right place, that you want that feedback, that you want that dialogue. That's how when you encourage that testing that takes place. The more you, good, just a really good takeaway on this. The more you call out on here, the more you care about an issue, the less likely you are to be on your best behavior. The more you care about an issue, the less likely you are to be on your best behavior. And that's because you have an emotional attachment. That's because the adrenaline's flowing, the blood's flowing to the muscles, not the brain, all of those different things. You're also less likely to listen to other people's point of view. When you care deeply about a particular topic, you tend to have strong opinions about it. And when people don't share those opinions, they often don't have the same background as you. You tend to get frustrated a lot more easily. Maybe because the right people were not involved, time and money wasted. How do leaders know and get the right people in the room? Maybe a question for later. Great question, Vicki, and I'm thinking a little bit. I think the important thing in those situations is to make sure that the right people are in the room. So you would probably know, most people should know who the right people are to have in the room to make those decisions. What you might need is the guts, for lack of a better term, to raise your hand and say, you know what? Vicki needs to be in this meeting too. Should I call her in really quick? Cameron needs to be in this meeting. He handles customer service. This definitely affects him. He should be in here. So actually raising it and calling that out so that those people can be involved in the discussion. Getting back to the terminology, they have the pool of meaning. You want as many people as possible to add meaning to the pool. It has to be the right people. And so that's something that isn't necessarily discussed specifically in the book, but you need to call it out when you don't think that the right people are on any meeting invite. I use this a lot of times when talking about meetings and actually eliminating people that don't need to be a part of a meeting because they add no meaning to it. They aren't decision makers. A lot of times you get in those games of I'm more powerful in the organization because I can have more people in my meeting. Or the meeting is more important just because I have 50 people in it from every single department in the company, as opposed to just really the 10 people that I really needed to talk to. So call it out would be my comment on that, because I don't think it's specifically addressed in this book at all. So when you're exploring other people's paths, all right, so when you're asking to have their opinions, when you're asking for their story, all right, you want to be sincere first and foremost. They call it out here. All right, you want to get their facts. You care about that, because if you don't really care about getting their facts, they're not going to give them to you. They're going to learn really quick that you don't want their opinion. We all have those bosses or those peers who, hey, does anybody else have any ideas, knowing full well that they don't care what anybody else's ideas are. Or I mean, I've had that CEO where we talk for 45 minutes and we just go back to whatever, you know, he decided at the beginning of the meeting, and the 45 minutes was completely wasted because he wasn't going to listen to our opinions anyways. I've been in those meetings as well. So be sincere. The big thing about getting other people's facts and other people's stories is to be curious and to stay curious. All right, you want that extra information. Everybody has information to give you. It can even just be their opinions. That can be information with which to make a better decision. So be curious to draw that out. Now, when people begin to share their volatile stories and feelings, we now face the risk of pulling out our own victim, villain, helpless stories to help us explain why. And so the big thing they're getting at is you want to stay curious. You don't want to rush to judgment. When people are telling you their stories, when they're giving you their facts, when they're responding to what you're saying, it's important that you do not rush to judgment. It's important, quite frankly, the best communicators often keep a very blank face, almost a poker face, when people are giving their stories and giving information, because people pick up on that when they're giving it to you. If you roll your eyes at somebody when they're telling a story, they're going to pick up on that, and it's going to change what it is that they say. So if you want to get more information from other people, then you want to be sincere that you want that information, but be really curious, and be curious in the right way. The other thing is to be patient. When others are acting out their feelings and opinions through silence or violence, it's a good bet that they're starting to feel the effects of the adrenaline. So again, I take a little bit of a different take on this as far as the patience is concerned. Realize that these things do take time. They mention the physiological aspect of things, but you usually don't snap right out of an emotional thing. So if you start going down that road, if they're explaining something that's charged, emotional, it's going to you can slowly move it to a more logical footing, but be ready to exercise some patience. There's a saying, Brian has a comment here, you cannot be curious and mad at the same time. You can only do one or the other. I like that, Brian. I had not heard that one before. You can be curious or mad at the same time. You can, and that's a good point. That's a really good point, and that's another reason to stay curious, is so you don't lend into that emotional aspect. So thanks for that comment, Brian. I appreciate that. When others are in either silence or violence, oh, never mind, I'm skipping that one. To encourage others to share their past, and we're still talking about this because it's one of the, what is it, that old saying, the greatest illusion of communication is that it's taking place. So much of it, we have no problem telling our opinions and our facts. Where people have a struggle is in having the patience to get facts from other people. And that skill of having that dialogue is so important. So they're doubling down on this again in here. And that is to encourage others to share their past. We'll use 4 power listening tools that can help you. Ask to get things rolling, all right? So simply asking for it. Again, whatever, you hear me talk about this when people ask about promotions and stuff like that. You want to ask for what it is that you want. If you want help with something, ask for it. If you want a promotion, make sure that you ask for it. Tell somebody that you're interested in it. If you want to get somebody's story, if you want to get more facts from them, then ask. Well, you told me this, and I understand that's how you feel. What is it there? What are the facts? What's the basis? What's the foundation for that feeling? What makes you feel that way? You're asking for more information. Part of this is the curious aspect of things as well. The other one is to mirror, to confirm feelings. In mirroring, we take the portion of the other person's path to action we have access to and make it safe for him or her to discuss. All we have so far are actions and some hints about the other person's emotions. So we start there. So what you want to do is, and they get into paraphrasing here is the next part of it, but this is an aspect of it, and that is mirroring it. So I would use the example in my hospitality experience. You have a pissed off customer who didn't get the room that they wanted, or their room was dirty, or it hasn't been clean. Oftentimes how I would start those conversations off is, Hi, I'm Cameron. I understand you have an issue with this and this and this, and I am so sorry. That's the sort of thing that would make me very frustrated and pissed off. I can absolutely understand where you're coming from. So you're acknowledging their feelings on what it is that you understand, and then you dive deeper into it, but you create that sort of common bond. You paraphrase to acknowledge the story. This is that technique of repeating back to people what it is that they're saying. Part of this is to let them know that you are acknowledging them enough and you're listening to them enough to be able to repeat it. And part of it is to make sure that you have it right to begin with. That's a key point to it. The other thing is what happens, and they get to, I love this, what happens if the path that the person has is the story that they have, if the facts that they have, what happens if the person is wrong? All right, so flat out, what if they're wrong? What if you're right, they're wrong? We're trying to understand their point of view, not necessarily agree with it or support it. Understanding does not equate with agreement. You are looking to add to that pool of common understanding, that pool of meaning that they talk about. And then you can reference things that are in that pool and make the decision moving forward. You don't have to agree with somebody to listen to what their point of view is. You are adding to the pool of meaning, you're gaining more information, and from that's going to come better decisions, and decisions that everybody can get along with. Not necessarily discussed in this book at all, but very much a fact, and that is that people don't always, when they give their opinions on things, they don't always need to win with their opinion. So much of it is just being heard. One of the biggest demotivators, one of those biggest things that pops up on surveys of people that quit jobs is nobody ever listened to me. It doesn't mean that they wanted to get their way. They just wanted to be listened to. So respected enough to have their opinion valued enough to be heard is often all you need for buy-in in so many of these cases. Getting back into exploring other paths, and this is a huge part of this section. So a couple of things is getting clear with yourself on what your motivations are, what your goals are, how, what your facts are, getting clear on yourself. And then really the next trick is pulling out the information from another person to be able to add to that common pool of meaning, understand where they're coming from, and make a firm decision. If you completely agree with the other person's path, say so and move on. Agree when you agree. Don't turn an agreement into argument. And so a lot of this is discussing about when things get when things turn into arguments or things turn into debates. Again, I'll draw to the political arena. Politically, most people agree on 80+% of their of the issues. It's the 20% that they don't. In arguments, many times that shrinks down to only 5 or 10% of what you don't agree with is what you guys end up arguing about, but you agree that we need to build a new headquarters. We need to have it within 2 miles. But what we're disagreeing, what we're arguing about is whether it's 2 stories high or 3 stories high or some sort of detail. Make sure you've called out where you agree. That often resets the tone for so many things. Then what you do is you point out the areas of agreement and then add elements that were left out of the discussion. You get back to facts is what they're getting at here. That is, and then you compare. That is, rather than suggesting that he or she is wrong, suggest that you simply differ. Again, you're diffusing those antagonistic moments, those moments where dialogue starts turning into debate. And you do that really, it's agreement. Focus on what it is that you agree on and then start going from there. All right? Start with, when you're exploring other people's past, just summarizing it here, start with an attitude of curiosity and of patience. When you're going down somebody else's path, when you're letting them explain what their story is, what their facts are. All right? Start by simply expressing an interest in the other people's view. Increase safety by respectfully acknowledging the emotions people appear to be feeling. All right? Acknowledging those emotions. I'd feel that way too if they didn't have my room and it was my, honeymoon or something like that, drawing from my own experience. Paraphrase as others begin to share parts of their story. Restate what you've heard to show not just that you understand, but also that it's safe for them to share what they're thinking. When you paraphrase, one thing I didn't hit on, when you paraphrase, you're suspending judgment. And then when people realize they're not being judged, they feel freer and safer to explain more. And the other thing is to prime. If others continue to hold back, prime. Take your best guess at what they may be thinking or feeling. That gets into that. I use the example of standing up and saying, hey, if you're not going to give me, nobody's giving their opinions on something. Well, is the concern out there that we're doing this just for money and not people? All right, you prime that discussion with what they might be thinking. And now as you begin to share your views, remember, agree when you share views. All right, find that out. If others leave something out, agree where you share views and then build and then add in what they were leaving out. And then compare. When you do differ significantly, don't suggest others are wrong. Compare your two views. Now the last chapter we'll get into here, and then it goes to a summary, is going to be my favorite one. It's moving to action. All right? Getting more meaning into the pool helps with dialogue. It's the one thing that helps people make savvy decisions. The more information you have, the better decisions that you're going to have. But dialogue, and they call it out, dialogue is not decision making. The two riskiest times in crucial conversations tend to be at the very beginning and at the very end. So at the very beginning, how you're starting out. Are you starting off with facts? Are you starting out with the right motivation? Are you starting out with the right goals? But the other issue is at the end of a crucial conversation, because dialogue isn't a decision. What are we going to do? Two key things, all right? How are decisions going to be made? So getting clear on what goes into the decisions. Hey, I didn't think we were deciding that here. I didn't think we were at this point here. I needed to get more facts. Making sure that people know how decisions are going to be made. And then, are we ever going to decide? That's it. When are we going to make a decision? When are we going to close off the pool of meeting for additions and make a decision based on what information that we have there? So moving towards action with your decisions. All right. 4 methods of decision making. All right. These 4 options represent increasing degrees of involvement. And remember, the more involvement you have, the more commitment that you're going to have from other individuals. So the first method of decision making is command. That's where you as the leader are making the decision and telling everybody what to do. Second one, a big favorite of mine, is consulting. All right, consulting is a process whereby decision makers invite others to influence them before they make their choice. All right, so getting information from other individuals. You can do this with team members. Hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think we should do? Or what do you think goes into that? So bringing people into this discussion, I'm a big fan of doing this with even simple decisions. Running it by team members, it gives them a sense of ownership. Third area of involvement, all right, and just getting clear on what kind of decisions are being made. Are you making command decisions and consulting decisions? Those are the 2 that I lean on most commonly. The last 2 I don't, and those are ones that have even more involvement. So perhaps that's something that if I was looking to improve my communication, might be something that I would lean on. Vote. Voting is best suited to situations where efficiency is the highest value and you're selecting from a number of good options. All right, that's a key. Number of good options. So put it out to a vote. If you've got a whole bunch of good options, maybe you don't necessarily care one way or another, then put it out to a vote for the team. The last one is consensus. All right, consensus means you talk until everyone honestly agrees with one decision. Very difficult to do, and it's something that is fought for in a number of organizations. When you go into a meeting, we're supposed to get consensus. Everybody's supposed to be comfortable with it. And it's oftentimes tough to get there, and it becomes consensus with an asterisk, which, a certain subset of the population doesn't agree with the decision, but the vast majority do. That's really almost more voting than consensus. But drawing back to, I think, what I said about people being able to at least give their opinions, I think you can still drive for some consensus. So those are the 4 decisions: command, consult, vote, and then consensus. All right, getting clear on those. Again, I kind of call those out just because from my own leadership, I know that I was very much command and consult. That's where I tended to go with things. I didn't fight for something that was a vote or in a consensus mode with a bunch of things. And maybe that's something that you could do to improve your communication with your team. So the other thing is to make assignments. So putting decisions into action. So we are going to decide. We're going to decide there. The 4 elements of putting that into action are who does what, by when, and how will they follow up. All right, when it's time to pass out assignments, remember, there is no we. I love this. When it's time to pass out assignments, there is no we. We've had those meetings. Where, okay, so we know that we're going to do this by the time the next meeting hits. Yeah, okay. But nobody was actually assigned it. Assign a name to every responsibility. All right, does what? Be sure to spell out the exact deliverables that you have in mind. By when? What is the deadline? All right, setting a deadline for when something needs to be done. Again, any gray area, any murky area in decision making nullifies so much of the good communication that you've put into place already. And lastly, how will you follow up? Always agree on how often and by what method you'll follow up on the assignment. It could be a simple email confirming the completion of the project. It might be a full report in a team or family meeting. All right. The other, I had one last kind of pull out or comment here, and I'd never ever heard this proverb before, but it was talking about documenting your work. So put it on paper, put it on writing, send out the meeting minutes, send out the notes, send out a follow-up, summarizing the conversation you had with somebody. And I never heard this proverb they mentioned in here. 1 dull pencil is worth 6 sharp minds. Say it again. 1 dull pencil is worth 6 sharp minds. Write things down. That'll help you remember them. I'm a big fan of note-taking in particular for yourself, but get it out on paper, and hopefully you'll be able to learn a little bit better and carry forward some of your successes and avoid some of those mistakes. So summarizing it up here in a couple of different ways. We talk about, in the end, putting it all together. And if there's only 2 things that you take from this entire book, it's these 2 things, all right? Learn to look. Look for how you're behaving. Look how other people are behaving. Too many times when we have a crucial conversation, we're feeling the pressure, we're feeling that emotionality. We just go through the motions and we're not looking at ourselves or others to navigate and make adjustments to reach the goals that we have for it. The second area is to make it safe. All right, encourage people to share their points of view. All right, call out your own mistakes. Call out where you may be failing. All right, but make it safe. So 2 things: learn to look for what's going on and make it safe. And those 2 things will have a dramatic impact on the communication that you have in the crucial conversations. And kind of wrapping it up here, the conclusion that they have is that it's not about communication, it's about results. And we wanted to identify the crucial moments, the crucial traits that people had. Moments when people's actions disproportionately affected their organizations, their relationships, and their lives. All right, they were looking for what got the results. And what they ended up with is that it all came to a head as far as conversation is concerned and communicating. So it does no good to make a decision if you can't communicate it out. And I think that's what they probably smack their heads on afterwards, is that, well, yeah, of course, it almost doesn't matter where the decision takes place. It has to be disseminated in some way. And organizations are not staffed by robots. They're staffed by people. And that is a complicated interaction, communicating with them, because you have all kinds of different motivations that people might have. So navigating these crucial conversations is one of those keys to your success. I'm a huge fan of communication, communicating more with your team, and this book was absolutely spectacular. So Crucial Conversations, pick it up, watch this video again. I know I hit most of the highlights, but you miss all of the code. There are a ton of great stories in this book. Loved it. So thanks again. Next week, yes, not for nothing, next week, Friday at noon, brand new book hit the shelves, The Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink. He is the author of Extreme Ownership, one of my very favorite leadership books that's come out over the last few years. And so he's going over the dichotomy of leadership in this one. So I'm really looking forward to dive into that one. This one just came out this week, so we will review it next Friday, 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I will see you all then. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much.